Welcome, Super Horror family, to another episode of Whispers in the Dark. I'm your host, Eddie, and tonight I'll be guiding you through a chilling tale that will surely make your blood run cold. Tonight's story was written by none other than the godfather of gruesome, the master of the macabre, our harbinger of hauntings, Papa Bones. So prepare to embark on a heart-pounding adventure filled with cryptic notes, gruesome murders, and terrifying revelations as we peek beyond the grave into the story of the vampire's prey. I hope you're ready, friends, because it's time for us to dim the lights. Detective Simon Farrell stared at the three cryptic messages on his desk, each one more disturbing than the last. I am the hunter, and none shall escape my wrath. New York City will be my feeding ground. One by one they will perish, their lifeless bodies a testament to my power. And the latest one, tonight the city will tremble and the first victim will fall. At first, Detective Farrell thought these were just ridiculous notes sent in by some bored teen. But this last one, it was just too clear. These ominous warnings haunted Farrell, hinting at a gruesome event about to unfold in the heart of New York City. Despite his instincts telling him to take the messages seriously, his superior, Captain James Sullivan, was quick to dismiss them as a tasteless hoax. Come on, Simon, every cop gets these. It just happened to be your turn this week. We have enough real crime. We don't need to get involved in some teenager's strange roleplay. Detective Farrell pled with his captain, but he refused to entertain the idea any further, shutting down the conversation. Unbeknownst to Farrell, New York City was on the very edge of a descent into darkness. The bustling city, normally filled with life and energy, was about to become the stage for a series of horrifying events and death. Detective Farrell went home that night, still feeling uneasy about the messages. His apartment was small and cluttered. It was obvious he didn't spend much time there. The only decoration on the walls was an old, well-kept photograph of a much younger, happier-looking Detective Farrell, a smiling woman, and a playful dog. Exhausted, he didn't even bother to change out of his clothes. Instead, he sank into a worn armchair, turned on the TV, and drifted off to sleep. Farrell awoke to the sound of the morning news. Another murder had taken place in New York City. This wasn't unusual. Sadly, more like par for the course. However, the details of this particular murder were chilling. The victim had been drained of his blood, with 2 puncture marks on his neck. The newscaster speculated it could be some twisted gang initiation, but Detective Farrell knew in his gut that it was connected to the notes he received. Determined, Farrell rushed to work and confronted Captain Sullivan once more about the murder and the cryptic messages. But just as before, Captain Sullivan refused to take his concern seriously, shutting down the conversation and demanding that Farrell not bring it up again. Not being one to take no for an answer, the detective knew he had to find a way to uncover the truth on his own. Because of his experience, he managed to convince his superiors to let him take the lead on the investigation. To be fair, it didn't hurt that everyone else thought this was going to be nothing more than chasing down a few stupid teens trying to join a gang. All right, Farrell, I'm going to let you take the lead on this investigation, but you better not waste any time chasing after these ridiculous messages. I want you to focus on the evidence at the crime scene and follow it wherever it leads. Is that understood? We're dealing with a real crime here, not some supernatural mystery. Don't get lost in your imagination. Yes, sir. Okay. Get to the crime scene and start piecing this together. Before leaving, Farrell quickly went to his desk and saw a note on it. In the house of lost souls, darkness shall again take its toll. This message didn't make any sense. A house of lost souls could be almost anywhere in New York. Old churches, abandoned buildings, renovated buildings. But it didn't matter anyways. Just as Captain Sullivan said, he would follow the clues at the crime scene. The murder took place in the old meatpacking district. It was an older, more historic part of New York City. The brick streets and aged buildings with their elaborate facades cast an unsettling atmosphere over the area. The alley itself was wedged between 2 old crumbling brick buildings that all but completely blocked out the sun. Detective Farrell meticulously combed through the crime scene, taking note of every detail. As he searched, His eyes caught a glimpse of a tattered old playbill lying on the ground near the victim's lifeless body. At least, that's what he thought at first. The playbill was from the long-abandoned Evergloom Theater, which stood just a few blocks away from the crime scene. The theater was said to be a breeding ground for illegal activities when it was active. The playbill looked new, though. You would expect something from so long ago to show some aging, be tinted yellow, and well frayed. But it wasn't. He picked it up to check inside, but the interior was completely blank. Could this be the House of Lost Souls? Either the Evergloom Theater was going to reopen, and this man was holding some playbill prototype, or this was a clue. Lucky for Detective Farrell, finding out would be easy. He only had to walk to the theater. If it was open, he could leave this behind. If it was closed, it was now officially part of his investigation, and Captain Sullivan couldn't say anything about it. He casually walked by, playbill in hand. The structure was still boarded up. Detective Farrell started looking around. "You're very early," said a voice breaking his concentration. Detective Farrell looked over and saw a half-drunk homeless guy. "Yeah, they only open at night." Detective Farrell decided to follow his instincts and return to the Evergloom Theater at night. He went home and changed his clothes. A black shirt, blue jeans, and a pair of construction boots should make it easier for him to blend in anywhere. As evening fell, the city transformed, and the theater seemed to take on an even more sinister appearance. He made his way back to the boarded-up entrance, unsure of what he would find inside. The place wasn't open for business. That's roughly what he expected. Sometimes drunk homeless people aren't very good for useful information. But as he got closer, he noticed there were faint lights flickering inside, and one of the wood boards had been strategically positioned, allowing people to slip through into the darkened theater. As he entered, Farrell observed a diverse group of people mingling inside, their rough appearances and hushed conversations forcing him to stop and think. They didn't seem like vampires, but there was something unsettling about them. Odds are, either the killer was there, or someone who knew who the killer was and was sending Detective Farrell clues was there. But whoever was sending him the notes might recognize his face, compromising him and the investigation. Detective Farrell inconspicuously looked around. The gathering was taking place in the theater's grand auditorium. The room was still beautiful, even in its current state of disrepair. The high ceilings, adorned with peeling paint and crumbling plaster, loomed over the crowd, while the old, worn curtains concealed the stage. The air was thick with whispers and laughter, creating a cacophony of sound that echoed off the decaying walls. Detective Farrell noticed that several of the attendees were wearing dark hooded cloaks. There was a room near the entrance full of them. Detective Farrell decided to don one himself in an attempt to blend in and move about the room unnoticed. With the hood pulled up to obscure his face, he began to navigate the crowd, trying to glean any information that might help him unravel the mystery of the messages and the murder. Detective Farrell carefully edged closer to a small group of people engaged in an intense conversation. Their hushed whispers and quick glances piqued his curiosity. "I heard the first one went smoothly. Drained completely. No one suspects anything. That's because they think it's some stupid gang initiation. Well, it's about to get a lot more interesting around here, that's for sure. I hear we're moving up the dates for..." Farrell was about to listen in further when the worn curtains on the stage suddenly pulled back, revealing a man standing in the spotlight. He exuded an air of power and danger, with piercing eyes that seemed to see through the darkness. His pale skin and slick-back hair only added to his otherworldly appearance. The auditorium fell silent as all attention shifted to the mysterious figure. Detective Farrell took the opportunity to position himself against a wall so he could observe the room without drawing attention to himself. The man on stage began to speak. His voice was smooth and captivating. "My fellow brethren, the time has come for us to assert our dominance. We've been lurking in the shadows for far too long, denying ourselves our true nature. The humans are nothing more than cattle, existing solely to nourish and sustain us. It's our right, no, our duty to feed on them." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, clearly excited by the man's words. As the noise and commotion grew, Detective Farrell took the opportunity to move around the room, scanning the faces of the attendees. His heart dropped when he caught sight of a face he never expected to see. Captain Sullivan. There he was, cloaked and hooded, shouting his approval and raising his fist in the air. The revelation shook Farrell to his core, finally making sense of the captain's reluctance to investigate the case. As the chilling reality of the situation sank in, Detective Farrell knew that he had stumbled upon a dark and dangerous secret that could change everything. The man on stage continued, his voice commanding the attention of the entire room. Tonight, we are honored to have a special guest among us, a member of the NYPD who will prove invaluable to our cause. Their presence will strengthen our position and ensure our success in this world where we rightfully belong. As Detective Farrell listened to the mysterious figure's speech, he couldn't help but think that the man was referring to Captain Sullivan. He scanned the crowd, hoping to locate his superior and determine his role in this sinister gathering. The crowd was dense, and the dim lighting made it difficult to discern individual faces. Despite his best efforts, Farrell couldn't find Captain Sullivan anywhere. Had the captain seen Farrell and made a hasty exit? Or was he lurking somewhere in the shadows, watching? Just as Detective Farrell considered making his own exit, the man on stage called out his name. Detective Farrell, we're truly grateful for your presence here tonight. In an instant, Farrell was grabbed from behind, his hands bound and a gag placed over his mouth. He was forcefully dragged onto the stage as the crowd roared in excitement. The man on stage laughed and addressed the audience, making light of the situation. Well, it seems our guest of honor has decided to exercise his right to remain silent. The crowd laughed along with him, reveling in the twisted spectacle. But in all seriousness, we owe a great deal of gratitude to Detective Farrell for his unwitting service to our cause. Thanks to his sacrifice tonight, we will be able to resurrect the powerful Lucius Draconis, who was staked by a police officer in New York City over 100 years ago. This resurrection will mark the beginning of a new era, one where we no longer hide in the shadows but stand tall, ruling over the cattle that walk these streets. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause. Detective Farrell struggled against his restraint, desperate to find a way to escape and stop the horrifying events unfolding before him. Let the heads of the 3 vampire families of New York come forward now. Tonight we complete the circle and restore balance to our world. 3 cloaked figures stepped forward, each carrying a ceremonial blade. They drew the blades across their palms, allowing their blood to drip into a chalice held by the vampire on stage. Detective Farrell continued fighting against his restraints, his heart pounding with fear and desperation. The cosmic scales demand balance. A century ago, a mortal officer of the law extinguished the life of our great ancestor, Lucius Draconis. Now another officer shall be the vessel that brings him back into the world. By mixing the blood of his 3 children and feeding it to this servant of the law, Lucius Draconis shall be reborn. His essence shall consume the mortal, and he shall rise anew, more powerful than ever before. Detective Farrell's heart raced as he realized the horrifying fate that awaited him. As the vampires held him down and tried to force his mouth open, he closed his eyes, his mind briefly drifting to that picture on his wall, the smiling young woman and their dog. Detective Farrell wasn't dead yet, but he definitely stopped living years ago. Just as he was about to give in to despair, Captain Sullivan burst onto the stage. With a swift and powerful kick, he knocked the chalice from the vampire's hands, sending the blood splattering across the floor. "Get your hands off him!" Captain Sullivan roared as he drew his weapon and fired at the vampires restraining Detective Farrell. The gunshots pierced the air, and the room erupted into chaos. The 2 vampires holding Detective Farrell fell back, setting him free. Farrell ran over to Captain Sullivan, who quickly untied him as the 2 vampires that were shot started to get back up, their gunshot wounds healing at supernatural speed. The vampire on stage and the heads of the 3 families disappeared into the frenzied crowd. Detective Farrell and Captain Sullivan split up, skillfully maneuvering themselves to force the 2 remaining vampires back to back. Captain Sullivan aimed his gun at the vampires, but only the one facing him could see it. Sensing danger, the vampire in his line of sight ducked just as Captain Sullivan pulled the trigger. The bullet found its target, in the back of the unsuspecting vampire's head, causing it to fall forward. Seizing the opportunity, Detective Farrell quickly grabbed a piece of wooden debris from the floor and staked the fallen creature before it could heal. Seeing the swift defeat of its comrade, the other vampire knew it was outmatched. With a hiss, it darted into the panicking crowd, disappearing into the shadows, just like the rest of the fleeing attendees. In the aftermath, several of the attendees were captured by police, but no real vampires were among them. Instead, they found misguided teenagers seeking the thrill of belonging to a hedonistic secret society. Some of them were convinced this was all an act. Outside the Evergloom Theater, Captain Sullivan approached Detective Farrell. "Listen, Farrell, I found out about these bizarre vampire rituals a few months ago by accident. I went undercover to try and put an end to it, and was worried you'd blow the whole operation. Well, I just want you to know that I was obviously right." The two of them let out a big laugh. No, really. This worked out pretty well too. I don't know how I planned for this to end, but I bet it was easier with you there to stake that vampire. Anytime, Captain. You know I might have to write you up for insubordination. Yes, please suspend me. My apartment's a mess. I need to buy some bleach. And maybe a broom. And a mop. And there you have it, dear listeners, the chilling conclusion to The Vampire's Prey. Thank you for joining me tonight on Whispers in the Dark. I hope you've enjoyed our macabre journey into the unknown. If you're hungry for more of the best original stories and all things creepy on YouTube, be sure to like, subscribe, and click that notification bell to stay updated on our latest episodes. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on tonight's story. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think. What other secrets do you think lie hidden in the shadows of the Evergloom Theater? And will the heads of the vampire family show up again in New York? Tell everyone in the comments. Until we meet again, stay safe and keep your wits about you, because you matter. And remember, the darkness is always listening. I hope after that story you're ready for a good night's rest. But, on this channel, sweet dreams are not guaranteed. Good night.